Okay, so you guys have been sending in some really great stuff lately. And this time around, it looks like the focus is on relationships,
Yeah.
marriage in particular, which is great because I know that's something a lot of us are thinking about.
Right.
And specifically the stuff you guys sent in is all about how to have like better communication with your partner
Yeah,
and
definitely.
and to build a stronger marriage through that kind of deeper communication.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think we all kind of know
Right.
that communication is important, right?
Right.
But I think diving into like what that actually means
Right.
and how to actually make it happen practically
Yeah.
is what's really helpful here.
Yeah, so we're going to go deep on this one.
Absolutely.
We've got this great article called How Deep Conversations Can Strengthen Your Marriage. Tips for Meaningful Communication.
Yeah, it's a really nice, concise kind of breakdown of a lot of different elements of communication and how we can really use it to build a strong bond in our marriage.
Okay, so let's jump right in.
Yeah.
You know, we all talk to our partners all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
About, just life stuff like work and the kids and what we're having for dinner.
Sure. Yeah.
But what's so different about these deep conversations that the article talks about?
It's funny because we were just talking about how
Yeah.
we all know that communication is important.
Right.
But it's like,
well, what does that even mean?
yeah, what does that mean? And why
Yeah.
why are these deep conversations so much more impactful than just like, regular chit chat?
Right.
I think one of the biggest things is that it really taps into this fundamental human need that we all have
Okay.
for connection and for understanding.
Okay.
And I think the article points out really nicely that these deep conversations are really the bedrock of a strong marital bond.
Okay.
And there's research to back that up.
Right.
There's research that shows that couples who engage in these kinds of conversations regularly report higher levels of intimacy and satisfaction in their relationships.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So just to be clear then, these deep conversations we're talking about are more than just, sharing information or like, logistical stuff.
Right.
It's like what is it about them that's so different?
Well, it comes down to, I think, vulnerability
Hmm.
and a willingness to really share your inner landscape with your partner.
Okay.
So it's not just about like,
Right.
the facts of your day.
Yeah.
It's about sharing your thoughts,
Okay.
your emotions, your aspirations,
Okay.
fears, dreams.
Yeah.
Really the things that shape who you are as a person.
Right.
And these deep conversations, they create a space where you and your partner can really see and be seen by each other
Right.
on this much deeper level.
Right.
And that fosters this really amazing sense of mutual understanding and importantly, respect for one another.
Yeah. So it's not just about, like you said, exchanging information. It's about sharing yourself, like
Yeah.
the deeper parts of yourself.
Exactly.
And one of the things that I thought was really interesting in the article was how they talked about how these conversations can even help with conflict.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like, how does that work?
Well, when we think about building this foundation of deep connection and understanding,
Yeah.
it kind of makes sense that would spill over into being able to navigate conflict more effectively.
Right.
If you have this foundation of open and honest communication,
Mm-hmm.
you're more likely to address issues early on before they escalate
Got it.
because you have this comfort level with discussing even potentially difficult feelings.
Oh, I see.
And so that prevents those like smaller issues from becoming huge blowouts.
Right. So it's like you're creating a safe space
Yeah.
for even those like, disagreements or the difficult conversations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Okay.
And it helps to kind of like normalize it in a way.
Right.
So you're not so afraid to bring things up. Right. You don't avoid them.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Another thing the article touched on was how deep conversations build this sense of emotional security, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how that happens?
Yeah. So I think, when you think about it,
Yeah.
we all have this need
Okay.
to feel secure and loved in our relationships.
Right.
And knowing that you can share your vulnerabilities with your partner and be met with empathy
Okay.
creates this really powerful sense of safety.
Gotcha.
It's like,
Yeah.
I can come to you
Right.
with anything and you're going to be there for me.
You're not going to judge me.
Yeah. You're not going to judge me.
You're going to listen.
You're going to listen and you're going to understand.
Yeah.
And that reinforces the bond between you,
Right.
makes you feel secure and accepted for who you really are.
Yeah, that feeling of being truly accepted and understood, like, that's gotta be huge. The article also mentioned how empathy and respect flourish through these deeper exchanges.
Yeah.
Like, I can sort of see the connection there,
Yeah.
but can you unpack that a little bit more?
Sure. So when you're really engaged in a deep conversation,
Yeah.
you're actively trying to understand your partner's perspective,
Okay.
even if it's different from your own.
Right.
And that takes effort.
Right.
It takes a deliberate effort to see things from their point of view.
Uh-huh.
And that cultivates empathy.
Yeah.
You know, that ability to really step into their shoes.
Right.
And when you validate their feelings,
Yeah.
you're demonstrating respect for their unique experiences and beliefs.
Okay.
And that's so important
Right.
because, you know, we all have different experiences.
Yeah.
We come from different backgrounds. We
Yeah.
have different beliefs.
Yeah.
And to be able to navigate those differences
Right.
successfully in a relationship,
Right.
you have to have that foundation of respect.
Okay, so it sounds like these conversations kind of help you appreciate the uniqueness of your partner
Yes?
and all the things that they bring to the relationship.
Yeah.
And how that in turn kind of deepens your bond.
Exactly. And it leads to a more resilient bond because
Yeah.
you're not just living these parallel lives.
Right.
You have this rich understanding of each other's internal landscape.
Yeah.
You become true partners in the sense that you're navigating life
Okay.
with a deep awareness
Mm.
of the things that shape each other's thoughts and feelings.
Okay, so we've talked about why deep conversations are so important.
Yeah.
But I think the bigger question is how do we actually have them?
Right.
And the article talks about this thing called active listening,
Uh-huh.
which sounds like more than just listening.
It is. It's like a skill.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a real skill.
Can you explain what that is?
So active listening is more than just hearing the words that your partner is saying.
Okay.
That's about fully engaging with their thoughts and emotions.
And really giving them your undivided attention
Okay.
so that they feel heard,
Right.
valued, and understood.
So that's a tough one.
It is.
Like undivided attention these days is hard.
so hard.
Everyone's got their phone and,
Yeah.
you know, we're always distracted.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what are some things that we can actually do to become better active listeners?
Well, the article points out several really key things.
Okay.
One of them is eye contact.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it sounds so simple,
Right.
but really looking at your partner when they're talking
Okay.
can make a huge difference.
Yeah.
It shows them that you're present,
Right.
that you're engaged,
Yeah.
that you care about what they're saying.
And it's not just like staring them down.
No.
All right.
It's this gentle kind of
Right.
eye contact that conveys warmth and connection.
Right. Right.
Right.
So there's a balance.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. What else?
So other nonverbal cues can be really important too.
Okay.
Like nodding your head,
Uh-huh.
leaning in slightly, even mirroring your partner's body language.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it shows that you're not just hearing them,
Right.
but that you're really with them.
You're in it with them.
Yeah, you're present in the moment.
Okay.
And then another really important piece of active listening
Yeah.
is validating your partner's feelings.
Okay.
So acknowledging what they're saying,
Mhm.
reflecting back what you hear,
Okay.
even if you don't necessarily agree with them.
Right.
It's so important to let them know that their feelings are valid
Okay.
and that you're hearing them.
So like you're saying, like, it's okay to feel that way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you can use phrases like,
Yeah.
it sounds like you're feeling really frustrated,
Oh, okay.
or that must have been really difficult for you.
Right. Right.
And those kinds of statements make people feel seen,
Uh-huh.
heard, and understood.
Okay.
And it just strengthens that connection between you.
So it's like you're saying, I see you, I hear you, and what you're going through matters to me? Yeah. Okay, and I would imagine that creates a much deeper sense of intimacy
It does, yeah.
than just, being like, uh-huh.
Right.
Or like, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And when partners consistently practice active listening,
Yeah.
they often report feeling much closer and more connected.
Okay.
And it creates this supportive environment
Yeah.
where they feel safe to express themselves openly and honestly.
Right.
Because they know they're not going to be met with judgment.
Right. Okay, cool. The article also talked about using open-ended questions to encourage these deeper insights.
Uh-huh.
What is it about those kinds of questions that makes them so effective?
Well, an open-ended question is basically any question that can't be answered with a simple yes or no.
Right.
So instead of asking,
Yeah.
did you have a good day?
Right.
You might ask,
Yeah.
what was the best part of your day?
Okay.
Or tell me about something that challenged you today.
Got it.
And these kinds of questions, they invite a more thoughtful response. They encourage your partner to really reflect on their experiences and their feelings.
So instead of just giving you like a one-word answer,
Yeah,
they have to actually like think about it and explain.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And that helps to really uncover the things that are going on beneath the surface.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to really understand each other on a deeper level.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Can you give some other examples of open-ended questions
Yeah, sure.
that
So,
couples can use?
and instead of asking,
Yeah.
how was your day?
Right.
You could say, what were some of the highlights of your day?
Okay.
Or what was something that made you laugh today? Or even something like,
Yeah.
what's something you're looking forward to this week?
Okay.
And those kinds of questions, they just open up the conversation.
Right.
And they invite your partner to share more of themselves with you.
Okay. And I think one of the things that I noticed with those examples is that they're all kind of positive. Like it doesn't have to be all like heavy, serious stuff.
No.
It can be just like fun, lighthearted things too.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes those lighter conversations can actually lead into deeper conversations.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because you're building that connection and that rapport.
Right.
And then you feel more comfortable sharing the more vulnerable stuff.
Okay, cool. So we've got the active listening. We've got the open-ended questions.
Yeah.
And the article also talks about the importance of creating a safe space for these conversations.
That's so important.
Like, what does that mean and how do we do that?
Well, it basically means creating an environment
Yeah.
where both partners feel comfortable sharing their thoughts and feelings without fear of judgment or criticism.
Right.
And that takes work.
Yeah.
It takes a conscious effort
Yeah.
to be mindful of how we're responding to our partner.
Right.
And to make sure that we're creating that space where they feel safe to be vulnerable.
Right. So it's not just about what we're saying.
Right.
But it's also about how we're listening and how we're reacting.
Exactly. And it's about, putting aside our own defensiveness.
Right.
And really trying to understand our partner's perspective.
Right. Okay. So we've talked about, the active listening, the questions, the safe space. But one of the things I was thinking about is, life gets busy.
Oh, it does.
And it can be hard to make time for these kinds of conversations.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what does the article say about that?
Well, the article talks about the importance of establishing rituals for deep conversation.
Like, what does that mean?
So it means basically creating a dedicated time and space for you and your partner to connect on a deeper level. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It could be as simple as, having dinner together without the TV on or going for a walk together once a week. But the key is to make it a regular habit.
Got it.
So that you're both prioritizing that time for connection.
Right. So it's like building it into your routine.
Exactly.
So it doesn't just get forgotten.
Right.
Okay. So what are some of the like specific examples of rituals that the article mentions?
Well, they talk about having meals together and really making that a distraction-free time.
Okay.
So no phones.
Right.
No TV.
Yeah.
Just you and your partner.
Focusing on each other.
Yeah.
Right.
And they also talk about taking walks together, which is a great way to kind of get out of the house, get some fresh air, and have those conversations in a more relaxed setting.
And it's funny because sometimes when you're walking, like it's easier to talk.
Yeah, I think so.
Than when you're like sitting face to face. Yeah, so that's a good one.
Yeah, and they also talk about scheduling time for these conversations.
Okay.
Which might sound a little bit unromantic.
Yeah, right.
But
it's practical.
It's practical because, we all have busy lives.
Right.
And if we don't actually schedule it in,
it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah. Okay, so we're being intentional about creating that space. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. And, I know we've been talking about all these, really positive things about these conversations.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important to acknowledge that not all deep conversations are going to be easy.
Right.
Sometimes you got to talk about the tough stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So how do we approach those kinds of conversations?
Yeah, that's where all of these skills that we've been talking about really come into play.
Right.
Active listening.
Yeah.
Open-ended questions.
Yeah.
Creating a safe space.
Right.
All of that is so important when you're navigating difficult topics.
Okay. And the article also talks about being compassionate.
Yes.
During those conversations.
Yes, compassion is key.
Like, how do we actually do that?
Well, it starts with being mindful of the timing and the setting.
Okay.
Don't try to have a difficult conversation
when
you're both exhausted
or
when you're in a public place.
Right.
Choose a time when you can both be relaxed and focused.
Gotcha.
And find a private space where you won't be interrupted.
So be intentional about it.
Exactly.
Okay, and then what about once we're actually in the conversation, what are some things we can do to kind of keep that compassionate approach?
Well, again, active listening is so crucial.
Okay.
Really trying to hear what your partner is saying.
Yeah.
Repeating it back to them to make sure you understand. Right. Validating their feelings. And approaching the conversation with a genuine willingness to see things from their perspective, even if you don't agree with them.
Right.
It's about acknowledging the emotional weight of what's being discussed.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
And it's also about using I statements.
Okay, the article talked about that. Why are those so helpful?
Well, when you use I statements, you're focusing on your own experience.
Okay.
Rather than blaming or accusing your partner.
Right.
So instead of saying, you always do this or you never do that, you might say, I feel hurt when this happens.
Okay.
Or I need this to happen.
Right.
And that just helps to keep the conversation more open and constructive.
Okay. Because it's less threatening.
Exactly. It's less likely to trigger defensiveness.
Okay, cool. So it sounds like even though those tough conversations can be really challenging, they can also be opportunities to strengthen your relationship.
Absolutely.
Right.
Because when you can navigate those difficult conversations successfully, it shows that you can work through anything together.
Right. And it builds trust.
Yes.
Right.
It builds trust and it deepens that connection.
Okay, cool. One more thing I wanted to touch on from the article was how deep conversations can also help you support each other's growth. Like, how does that work?
Well, when you have these open and honest conversations with your partner, you learn about their dreams, their aspirations, their goals. And you can then support them in pursuing those things.
Right. So it's like being each other's cheerleader.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's also about being a sounding board. Okay. You know, when your partner is facing challenges, you can help them to brainstorm solutions.
Okay.
Offer different perspectives.
Yeah.
And just be there for them as they navigate those difficulties.
So it's like you're saying those conversations are opportunities to really understand what your partner's going through.
Yeah.
And to be there for them in a really meaningful way.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. And the article ends with this really great personal anecdote that kind of illustrates this point.
It does.
Can you tell us about that?
So the author talks about how she met her husband in college. And one of the things that really drew them to each other was their shared love of deep conversations.
Okay.
They would talk about politics. They would talk about current events.
Yeah.
They would talk about their dreams for the future.
Okay.
And those conversations really helped them to build a strong foundation for their relationship.
Right. So it wasn't just, small talk.
Yeah.
It was like real substantive conversations.
It was deep, meaningful connection.
Right from the start.
Right from the start.
And that foundation has clearly lasted.
It has, yeah.
They've been together for many years.
Yeah, and she talks about how their kids even comment on how close they are.
Right.
How much they communicate.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so it's a really nice example of how prioritizing deep conversation can really have a lasting impact on a relationship.
Awesome. Okay, so let's kind of sum up what we've learned today.
Yeah.
We talked about the importance of deep conversations for intimacy and satisfaction in marriage. We talked about the power of active listening.
Yes.
And asking open-ended questions to really encourage that deeper sharing. We talked about creating rituals for these conversations so that they actually happen regularly.
Right.
And we talked about how to approach those tougher conversations with compassion and using I statements to keep things, safe and productive.
Absolutely.
And finally, we talked about how deep conversations can help us support each other's growth.
Yes.
Both individually and as a couple. So much good stuff here.
Yeah, I think so.
What would you say is like the one thing that you hope our listeners take away from this conversation?
Well, I hope that listeners realize that deep conversations aren't just like a nice to have.
Yeah.
They're essential for a strong and healthy marriage.
Right.
And I hope they feel empowered to start incorporating some of these strategies into their own relationships.
Awesome. Yeah. So for you, our listener, think about which of these things we talked about today really resonated with you.
Yeah.
And what's one thing that you can do this week to start having more of these deep conversations with your partner?
Absolutely.
And maybe even just, making that decision to prioritize that time for connection is the first step to building a stronger and more fulfilling relationship.
Couldn't agree more.
Awesome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
This was a great conversation.
Yeah, it was fun.
And we'll see you guys next time on The Deep Dive.